He was the last human still standing, and the only one who refused to fight. The air tasted like cold metal and distant storms as Marcus Hale stood in the open plain, boots half sunken into glass sand that still held the memory of heat. The sky above wasn't blue. It shimmered in layers of violet and dim gold, as if the planet itself couldn't decide what kind of world it wanted to be. His suit's internal gauge blinked quietly against his wrist, oxygen at 42%, temperature dropping fast, wind speeds climbing past 50 miles per hour. None of it mattered. Not anymore. Around him, the battlefield had gone still, not empty, just finished. Massive alien structures loomed in the distance like frozen waves, their surfaces reflecting fractured light across the horizon. The last echoes of conflict had faded hours ago, leaving behind a silence that pressed against his ears harder than any noise ever could. Marcus didn't move, didn't reach for the weapon resting against his leg. He had already made that decision somewhere back there. Somewhere between the first time he saw fear in an alien's eyes and the moment he realized it looked exactly like his own. A low vibration rolled across the ground, subtle at first, then steady, like a heartbeat too large to belong to anything human. He felt it through the soles of his boots before he saw her. She didn't arrive with chaos. She arrived with certainty. Queen Zaryeth stepped forward from the horizon as if the world itself had parted to make room for her. Tall, easily 8 feet, her form carried an effortless precision, every movement measured, controlled. Her skin caught the strange light of the sky, shifting between deep blue and violet, like polished stone beneath water. There was no armor, not in the way humans understood it. What she wore seemed grown, not built, layered plates that followed her body like a second skin, elegant and unyielding at the same time. When she stopped 10 feet in front of him, the wind seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether it was allowed to pass between them. Her eyes found him immediately, not scanning, not searching, just knowing. "So this is what remains," she said, her voice carrying without effort, low and resonant, like it had weight to it. Marcus let out a slow breath, watching it fade into the cold air. "Looks like it." Her gaze moved briefly to the weapon at his side, then back to his face. There was something like amusement there, sharp, controlled, almost curious. "You do not raise your weapon," she observed. "Is that defiance or surrender?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question, though he already knew his answer. His fingers brushed the edge of the grip, then fell away. Neither. For a moment, nothing happened. No sudden movement. No escalation. Just the space between them, stretching thin with something unspoken. The queen's lips curved, just barely, not quite a smile. "Your kind always chooses one or the other." Marcus shook his head, slow, almost tired. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's the problem." The wind picked up again, colder this time, threading through the silence like it was trying to carry something away, but whatever had settled between them didn't move. And for the first time since she arrived, Queen Zaryeth didn't speak right away. The silence stretched long enough to feel intentional, like she was measuring something he could not see. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, the faint crunch of glass sand under his boots echoing farther than it should have. His suit registered the motion with a soft pulse against his wrist, a reminder that systems were still running even if everything else had stopped. Queen Zaryeth studied him without blinking, her gaze steady, analytical, but not cold in the way he expected. It was something else, something closer to curiosity. "You stand in the aftermath of your defeat," she said at last, her voice carrying across the open plain without effort. "Your forces have withdrawn. Your command structure has collapsed. And yet, you remain." Marcus glanced past her for a second, toward the distant silhouettes of structures fading into the shifting light, then back to her. Somebody had to. Her head tilted just slightly, a movement so precise it felt deliberate. For what purpose? He let out a slow breath, watching it dissolve into the air. To see how it ends. That seemed to catch her attention. Not in a dramatic way, not a visible reaction, but something in her posture adjusted, as if the answer did not fit into the pattern she expected. "It has already ended," she replied. "Your presence does not alter the outcome." Marcus gave a small shrug, almost casual. Maybe not. The wind pushed harder now, tugging at the edges of his jacket, carrying a low, distant hum from somewhere beyond the horizon. His eyes stayed on her. but it changes how it feels. For a brief moment, there was no response. The queen's gaze sharpened, not with anger, but with focus, like she was trying to align his words with something she understood. Explain. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck, slow, unhurried, like time had stopped belonging to anyone else. You can win every fight, he said, his voice steady. But if all that is left at the end is silence, then what exactly did you win? The question lingered between them, heavier than anything that had been said so far. Zarietha's eyes narrowed slightly, the faint glow beneath her skin shifting with the movement. Power, she answered. Control. Order. Marcus nodded once, like he had expected that. Yeah, he said quietly. That is what we used to think too. The admission hung in the air, softer than the wind, but somehow louder. Something flickered across her expression then, subtle but real, a fracture in the perfect composure she carried. Used to. Marcus looked down briefly at the ground beneath his feet, the fractured surface reflecting the strange sky in broken pieces, then back at her. Turns out, he said, that kind of power does not leave much room for anything else. The queen did not respond immediately. Her gaze moved past him this time, scanning the empty expanse behind him, as if searching for something that was no longer there. When her eyes returned to him, there was a shift, small but undeniable. You speak as though you have abandoned it. Marcus shook his head once, almost amused, though there was no humor in it. No, he said. We just learned it is not the only way to exist. The wind died down for a moment, and in that brief stillness, the space between them felt different. Not smaller, not safer, just changed. And for the first time since she arrived, Queen Zarieth did not look at him like something beneath her. She looked at him like something she could not quite define. The change was subtle, but Marcus felt it the same way you feel a storm shift direction before the sky even darkens. The weight in the air was different now, less like pressure and more like attention. Queen Zarieth took a slow step closer. Not aggressive, not cautious, just deliberate, closing the distance until only a few feet separated them. Up close, the glow beneath her skin was more complex than it had seemed from afar. Patterns moving faintly like light beneath deep water, reacting not to the environment, but to something internal, something alive. Marcus did not step back. He did not need to. You speak of alternatives, she said, her voice quieter now, though it carried the same authority. Yet your kind arrived in this system with weapons, fleets, and intent to expand. That is not coexistence. That is competition. Marcus let out a slow breath, his eyes drifting briefly to the horizon before returning to her. You are not wrong, he said. We came here the same way we always do. Curious, hopeful, and a little too confident. There was no defensiveness in his tone, no attempt to argue. Just acknowledgement. That seemed to unsettle her more than resistance would have. Then why stand here now and claim difference? She pressed. Why speak of restraint when your species has demonstrated none? Marcus shifted his stance slightly, the wind brushing past him in a softer current now, as if the world itself was listening. Because we learn, he said simply. Slow, sometimes the hard way. But we learn. Zarietha's gaze narrowed again, but not in anger. It was focus, sharp and precise, like she was dissecting each word. Learning implies error, she said. Error implies weakness. Marcus smiled faintly, not mocking, just tired in a way that came from experience. Yeah, he replied. It does. The admission landed between them, quiet but undeniable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distant structures caught a flicker of shifting light, casting long reflections across the ground that moved like slow waves. Marcus glanced down at his hands, flexing his fingers once as if grounding himself, then looked back at her. But it also means you get a second chance to choose something better. Zarietha's expression changed again, more noticeable this time, a slight tightening around her eyes, a pause that should not have been there. Your kind believes in second chances, she said, almost as a statement rather than a question. Marcus nodded. Not always, he admitted. But enough of us do. He gestured lightly to the empty space around them, the quiet aftermath stretching in every direction. That is kind of the point. The queen followed his gesture, her gaze sweeping across the still landscape. For the first time, there was something in her posture that did not align with absolute certainty. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A hesitation. In my empire, she said slowly. There is no concept of a second chance. There is only outcome. Success or failure. Advancement or removal. Marcus looked at her, really looked this time, past the presence, past the authority, searching for something beneath it. That sounds efficient, he said. It is, she replied immediately. He tilted his head slightly. Is it better? The question hung there, heavier than the others. Zarieth did not answer right away. Her gaze shifted again, not outward this time, but inward, as if the question had landed somewhere she did not often visit. The wind picked up just enough to stir the edges of Marcus's jacket, carrying a low, distant hum across the plain. He waited, not pressing, not filling the silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than before, almost thoughtful. It has always been sufficient. Marcus gave a small nod, like he understood exactly what that meant. Yeah, he said softly. We thought that too once. And this time, when the silence returned, it did not feel empty. It felt like something was beginning to shift. The wind settled into a low, steady rhythm, like the world itself was breathing again, slower this time, more measured. Marcus shifted his stance just enough to ease the tension in his shoulders, but his eyes never left her. Queen Zarieth remained where she stood, yet something in her presence had changed, not diminished, not weakened, but recalibrated. The certainty that once surrounded her now carried a thin fracture, almost invisible, but real enough to feel. You suggest that your species evolved beyond this, she said after a long pause, her voice quieter, less declarative. That you abandoned the principles that brought you here. Marcus shook his head slightly. No, he said. We did not abandon them. We just started questioning them. He glanced down at the ground again, the fractured surface catching the dim light in uneven reflections, then back at her. There is a difference. Zarieth's eyes followed that movement, as if even the smallest shift in him now mattered. Questioning implies uncertainty, she replied. Uncertainty leads to instability. Instability leads to collapse. Marcus let out a small breath, something almost like a laugh, but without humor. Or it leads to change. The word lingered longer than the others. Change. It did not fit cleanly into the structure she was used to. That much was clear. She took another step forward, close enough now that Marcus could see the faint variations in the patterns beneath her skin, like currents moving under a surface that never broke. Your logic is inconsistent, she said. You claim strength and restraint, yet your history demonstrates expansion through force. You claim growth through error, yet error compromises survival. Marcus nodded slowly, as if he had heard this argument before, maybe 100 times, maybe more. Yeah, he said. It does. Sometimes. He looked past her again, but not at the horizon this time. Somewhere closer. Somewhere remembered. But it also teaches you what matters when everything else falls apart. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. The quiet carried it farther than anything louder could have. Zarieth watched him carefully, her posture still perfect, but her stillness now held something different. Not just control. Attention. And what, she asked, remains when everything falls apart? Marcus did not answer right away. He took a slow breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs, letting it out just as slowly. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before, but steadier. The choices you make when no one is forcing you, he said. That is what stays. The words settled into the space between them, not heavy, not sharp, but grounded in a way that did not need emphasis. Zarieth's gaze shifted again, this time not away, not inward, but deeper, as if she was trying to trace the origin of something she had never encountered. Choice, she repeated, the word unfamiliar in her tone, not because she did not understand it, but because she had never needed to question it. In my empire, choice is aligned with purpose. Deviation is corrected. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying her with the same focus she had once used on him. And who decides the purpose? The question came without challenge, without accusation, but it landed harder than any confrontation could have. For the first time since she had stepped onto the field, Queen Zarieth did not have an immediate answer. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something that had no name in her world. The wind shifted again, brushing between them, carrying a faint resonance from distant structures, like an echo that had taken too long to arrive. Marcus remained where he was, steady, patient, as if he understood that this moment mattered more than anything that had come before. And as the seconds stretched, the queen of a vast empire stood in stillness, not because she was choosing not to act, but because, for the first time, she was not entirely sure what action meant. The question did not fade. It stayed there, suspended between them, steady and unyielding. Marcus did not repeat it. He did not need to. Queen Zyreth stood motionless, her gaze fixed on him, but not with dominance anymore. It was something sharper, something more dangerous in a different way. Consideration. The patterns beneath her skin shifted again, faint pulses of light moving in slow, uneven rhythms, like something adjusting to a new variable it could not immediately resolve. The wind carried a colder edge now, brushing past them in long, quiet streams that tugged at the edges of Marcus's sleeves. His suit registered the drop in temperature, but he ignored it. There were more important things happening than the environment. Purpose, she said at last, her voice slower than before, each word placed with precision, is not chosen. It is defined, refined over generations. Perfected. Marcus gave a small nod, acknowledging the structure in her words. Yeah, he said, that is one way to do it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. It is the only way that ensures survival. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, not challenging, not dismissing, just seeing her. Does it? He asked quietly. The question did not come with force. It came with weight. Zyreth's posture held, but the pause that followed stretched longer this time. Not hesitation. Processing. My empire spans systems, she replied. It has endured beyond the lifespan of your entire species. That is evidence enough. Marcus exhaled slowly, watching the breath disappear into the cold air. It is evidence that it works, he said. Not that it is the only thing that works. The distinction settled between them, subtle but sharp. The queen's gaze shifted slightly, as if recalibrating again, trying to align his perspective with her framework and finding no direct match. Alternatives introduce risk, she said. Risk invites failure. Marcus's lips pressed into a faint line, not quite a smile. Yeah, he said. That part is true. He glanced down briefly, brushing a layer of fine dust off his glove with his thumb, a small, human motion that felt almost out of place in the vast stillness around them. But avoiding risk, he continued, lifting his eyes back to hers, also means you never find out if something better was possible. The words did not echo. They settled. Zyreth did not respond immediately. Her gaze drifted past him again, but not in search of threats or movement. It was something else now. Reflection, maybe. The distant structures shimmered faintly, catching the shifting light of the sky in slow pulses. Better, she repeated, softer than before, as if testing the word. Your species measures outcomes differently. Marcus nodded once. We have to, he said. We do not have the luxury of getting everything right the first time. There was no shame in it. No apology. Just truth. The queen's eyes returned to him, and this time, there was no trace of amusement left. No superiority. Only focus, deeper than before. And when your choices fail? She asked. Marcus did not look away. Then we live with it, he said. We learn. And if we get the chance, he paused, just long enough for the silence to hold the space. We choose again. The wind slowed, almost to nothing. The air between them felt still, charged with something neither of them fully understood yet. Zyreth stood there, the ruler of something vast and ordered, facing a man who had nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove, and somehow, that made his words harder to dismiss. Her posture remained straight, controlled, but the certainty that once defined her presence no longer filled the space the same way. It had shifted, just enough to let something else exist beside it. And for the first time since this encounter began, the queen did not look like someone delivering judgment. She looked like someone standing at the edge of a question she had never been forced to ask. The stillness did not break, but it deepened, like the moment just before a decision becomes irreversible. Marcus shifted his gaze slightly, not away from her, but past her shoulder, where the horizon blurred into bands of dim violet and fading gold. His suit pulsed, again against his wrist, oxygen dropping to 39%, a quiet reminder that time still moved, even if this moment felt suspended outside of it. He did not react. Queen Zyreth noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes flicked briefly to the faint indicator light on his wrist, then back to his face, sharper now, more aware. Your life support is failing, she said, not as a threat, not as concern, just as fact. Marcus glanced down at it, then shrugged lightly. Yeah, he replied. It has been doing that for a while. The casual tone did not match the reality of the situation, and that contrast lingered in the air longer than either of them expected. Zyreth took another step closer, close enough now that the space between them felt almost deliberate, like a boundary neither of them had agreed to cross, yet both were aware of. You remain here, she said, her voice lower now, quieter, engaging in philosophical contradiction, while your survival window narrows. Marcus let out a slow breath, watching it fade. I am aware, he said. Then your actions are illogical. Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering her words. Depends on what you think the goal is. Her eyes narrowed, not in frustration, but in focus. The goal is survival. Marcus shook his head once. That is one goal, he said. Not the only one. The distinction landed heavier this time. Zyreth did not respond immediately. Her gaze shifted again, briefly scanning the empty field, then returning to him, as if recalibrating her understanding of the variables in front of her. If survival is not primary, she said slowly, then your hierarchy of purpose is flawed. Marcus gave a faint smile, not mocking, just human. Or maybe it is just different. The wind picked up again, softer this time, carrying a low resonance from the distant structures, like a sound too deep to hear clearly, but strong enough to feel. Marcus adjusted his stance slightly, his movements unhurried, controlled, as if he had already accepted whatever came next. Let me ask you something, he said. Zyreth did not interrupt. If you achieve everything your system is designed to do, Marcus continued. Perfect control, total order, no deviation. What happens next? The question did not challenge her authority. It questioned its direction. The Queen's expression remained composed, but the pause that followed was longer than before. Continuation, she said. Expansion. Optimization. Marcus nodded slowly. And after that, another pause. Smaller this time, but still there. Further refinement. Marcus exhaled softly, his breath fading into the cold air. So it never ends. It does not need to, she replied. Marcus looked at her, steady, grounded, like he was standing on something she could not see. That sounds exhausting, he said quietly. The words were simple, almost too simple, but they carried something deeper than their structure. Zyreth's gaze sharpened again, but not with anger. With disruption. Endurance is not a burden, she said. It is strength. Marcus nodded once. Yeah, he said. We thought that too. He glanced down briefly, then back up, meeting her eyes without hesitation. Turns out, he added, his voice softer now, strength is not just about how long you can keep going. The wind slowed again, the world holding its breath around them. It is also about knowing when you should not. The words settled into the space between them, quiet, unforced, but impossible to ignore. And for the first time since she stepped onto this field, Queen Zyreth did not immediately counter, did not redefine, did not correct. She simply stood there, looking at him, as if something fundamental in her understanding of strength had just shifted, and she had no immediate framework to contain it. The air felt thinner now, not just from the failing oxygen system, but from something else, something shifting beneath the surface of everything they had said. Marcus could feel it in the quiet, in the way the wind no longer rushed but lingered, like it was waiting for an answer neither of them had fully formed yet. His display flickered again, 36%, a soft warning pulse against his wrist, but he did not look at it this time. He did not need to. Queen Zyreth noticed anyway. Her gaze moved to his face, searching, not for weakness, but for something harder to define. You accept this, she said slowly, her voice carrying less certainty than before. The limitation of your own existence. The inevitability of its end. Marcus considered that for a moment, not dismissing it, not resisting it, just holding it. Yeah, he said. I do. The simplicity of the answer seemed to unsettle her more than anything else he had said. Why? She asked. The question came sharper this time, but not aggressive. Urgent. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, the faint sound of his boot against the ground echoing in the stillness. Because it is real, he replied. And pretending it is not, does not change anything. Zyreth's eyes narrowed, the faint glow beneath her skin shifting again, faster now, less controlled. In my empire, we do not accept limitation. We overcome it, extend it, replace it. Marcus nodded once. Yeah, he said. We try that too. He glanced at her, his expression steady, but there was something deeper behind it now. Something personal. But there is a difference between extending something and understanding it. The words settled into her, not as resistance, but as contrast. She took another step closer, close enough now that the space between them felt almost symbolic, like crossing it would mean something neither of them had fully defined yet. You speak as though limitation has value, she said. Marcus met her gaze without hesitation. It does. That answer came faster than the others. Stronger. Not louder, but more certain. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint chill that brushed across his face, but he did not react. If everything lasts forever, he continued, his voice calm, measured, then nothing matters as much. The statement hung there, quiet, but undeniable. Zyrieth did not respond immediately. Her gaze locked onto his, searching, analyzing, but for the first time, not resolving. Impermanence, she said slowly, the word unfamiliar in her tone. You assign meaning to it. Marcus gave a small nod. We have to, he said. Otherwise, what is the point of choosing anything at all? The question was not directed at her. Not entirely. It existed on its own, filling the space between them with something heavier than logic. The queen's posture remained perfect, but something beneath it had shifted again. The certainty that once defined her presence was no longer absolute. It had edges now. Unresolved edges. In my world, she said, quieter than before, meaning is assigned through achievement, through expansion, through permanence. Marcus studied her for a long moment, not judging, not correcting, just seeing. And does that ever feel enough? He asked. The question landed deeper than the others. Not because of how it was said, but because of what it implied. Zyrieth did not answer. Not right away. Her gaze drifted past him again, but this time it did not search the horizon. It lingered in the space just beyond him, as if she was looking at something she had never needed to see before. The wind slowed again, almost completely still. Marcus did not move. He did not push. He simply stood there, steady, present, letting the silence do what words no longer could. And in that silence, for the first time in her existence, the queen of an empire that measured everything in certainty, found herself standing in the presence of something she could not measure at all. The silence stretched longer this time, not fragile, not empty, but dense with something neither of them could easily define. Marcus could feel his breathing slow, each inhale measured, each exhale thinner than the last. His suit pulsed again, oxygen at 33%, the indicator dimmer now, almost reluctant to keep reminding him. He ignored it, not out of denial, but because it no longer felt like the most important thing in front of him. Queen Zyrieth had not moved. Not physically, but something within her had shifted further, deeper, like a structure beginning to question its own foundation. Her gaze was no longer fixed in dominance. It lingered, searching, not for weakness, but for meaning. Enough, she repeated quietly, as if testing the weight of the word. You ask if it is enough. Marcus nodded once, slow and steady. Yeah, he said. I do. The wind moved gently between them, carrying a faint hum from the distant architecture, a sound so low it felt more like a memory than noise. Zyrieth's eyes narrowed slightly, but not in resistance. In focus. In my empire, she said, her voice measured, there is no concept of enough. There is only progression. Stagnation is failure. Marcus let out a quiet breath, watching it fade into the cold air. That sounds like a race you can never finish, he said. The words were simple, but they landed with a quiet force. Zyrieth did not respond immediately. Her gaze drifted slightly, not away from him, but past him, as if she was tracing the idea beyond the space they occupied. A race implies an endpoint, she said after a moment. There is none. Marcus gave a faint nod. Exactly. That single word hung there, subtle, but sharp. The queen's posture remained composed, but the pause that followed stretched longer than before. Something in her expression shifted, not visibly enough to define, but enough to feel. If there is no endpoint, Marcus continued, his voice calm, steady, then how do you know when anything you do actually matters? The question did not come as a challenge. It came as an opening. Zarieth's eyes returned to him, and this time there was something behind them that had not been there before. Not certainty, not control, something closer to uncertainty. Everything we do matters, she said, but the statement lacked the absolute precision it once carried. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying her, not pushing, just observing. Then nothing stands out, he replied. If everything matters the same, then nothing really does. The wind slowed again, the air settling into a quiet stillness that felt heavier than before. Zarieth did not speak. Her gaze remained locked on his, but her focus had shifted inward again, deeper than before, like she was tracing a path she had never needed to follow. You define meaning through limitation, she said finally, her voice softer, less certain. Marcus nodded. Yeah, he said, because when something can end, you start paying attention to it. The words settled gently, but they did not fade. They stayed, anchoring the space between them in something more than logic. Zarieth's posture remained upright, controlled, but the presence that once felt immovable now carried something else alongside it. A question, a possibility. And you believe this makes your existence more significant? She asked. Marcus considered that for a moment, then gave a small shake of his head. Not more significant, he said. Just more real. The answer was quiet, but it landed deeper than anything he had said so far. The queen did not respond. Not immediately. Her gaze drifted again, but this time it did not search outward or inward. It lingered in the space between them, as if that space itself had become something new, something undefined. The wind barely moved now, the world holding its breath around them. And for the first time, the ruler of a civilization built on certainty stood in the presence of something she could not optimize, could not measure, could not control, and she did not know if she wanted to. The quiet did not feel empty anymore. It felt full, like something invisible had settled into the space between them and refused to leave. Marcus could hear his own breathing now, slower, thinner, each inhale pulling just a little less air than before. His suit pulsed again, oxygen at 30%, the indicator dim and steady, like it had accepted what was coming long before he had. He did not look down. He did not need to. Queen Zarieth did. Her eyes flicked to the faint glow on his wrist, then back to his face. And this time, there was no calculation behind it. No strategy. Just awareness. You are running out of time, she said, her voice quieter than it had ever been. Marcus gave a small nod. Yeah, he replied. That tends to happen. The simplicity of it lingered, heavier now, grounded in something real and immediate. The wind moved again, softer than before, brushing across the open field like a final breath the planet itself was holding. Zarieth took a slow step forward, closing the last of the distance between them. Close enough now that the difference between them felt smaller, not physically, but in a way that mattered more. You continue to speak, she said. To question, to reflect, when your existence is nearing its end. Marcus met her gaze, steady, calm, as if the words did not carry the weight they should have. That is exactly why I am speaking, he said. The answer landed without hesitation. Zarieth's eyes searched his, deeper now, not for contradiction, but for understanding. Explain, she said. Marcus took a slow breath, letting it out carefully, like he was choosing each word with intention. Because when time is limited, he said, you start paying attention to what actually matters. The statement settled into her, not as logic, but as something harder to process. And what? She asked, her voice softer now, almost uncertain. Have you determined matters? Marcus did not answer immediately. He looked at her, really looked, past the authority, past the presence, at something beneath it. Then he spoke. This, he said. The single word hung there, simple, but impossibly heavy. Zarieth's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to break the perfection she had carried since she arrived. This, she repeated. Marcus nodded once. The choice, he clarified. Right here, right now. The wind stilled completely. The world seemed to pause with it. Zarieth did not move. You believe this moment defines meaning, she said. Marcus gave a faint, tired smile. I know it does, he replied. There was no arrogance in it, no attempt to convince, just certainty of a different kind. The queen's gaze held his, and for the first time, there was no hierarchy in it. No above or below, just two perspectives, standing in the same space. In my world, she said slowly, moments do not define outcomes. Systems do. Marcus nodded slightly. Yeah, he said, but systems do not choose. People do. The distinction landed deeper than anything before it. Zyrietha's posture remained still, but something within it shifted again, more visibly this time. Not a fracture. Not weakness. Something opening. And you believe, she said, her voice quieter now, that this choice matters more than everything that came before it? Marcus held her gaze, steady, unflinching, even as his breath grew thinner. Yeah, he said softly, because it is the only thing that has not been decided yet. The words settled into the silence, and this time, they did not just linger. They stayed. Zyrieth did not respond immediately. Her eyes remained locked on his, but there was no longer a framework behind them, no immediate structure to place his words into. Only a question. A real one. The wind did not return. The distant hum faded. The entire world seemed to narrow to this single moment, this single space between them. And for the first time in her existence, the queen of an empire that controlled everything stood before a choice that could not be calculated. The moment did not move forward. It did not collapse or resolve. It simply held, stretched between them like something too fragile to disturb and too important to ignore. Marcus felt the weight of it settle into his chest, heavier than the thinning air, heavier than the quiet pulse of his suit, now dimming at 27%. Each breath came slower, shallower, but his eyes never left hers. Queen Zyrieth stood unmoving, her presence no longer pressing down on the space around her, but instead, suspended within it. For the first time, she did not command the moment. She existed inside it. Her gaze remained locked on Marcus, but the certainty behind it had dissolved into something far more complex. Something unfinished. A choice, she said, her voice lower now, almost cautious, as if the word itself required care. One moment, outweighing an entire system. Marcus gave a faint nod, not pushing, not insisting, just confirming. Sometimes, he said. Yeah. The wind did not return. The silence stayed absolute. Zyrietha's eyes shifted slightly, not away from him, but across his face, tracing something she had never needed to observe before. Not strength, not threat, something else, something quieter. And if your choice leads to failure, she asked, to the loss of everything that remains of your kind, does it still matter? Marcus took a slow breath, the effort visible now in the subtle rise of his chest, but his voice did not change. Yeah, he said. The answer came without hesitation. That seemed to catch her more than anything else. Explain, she said, though the word carried less command than before. Marcus blinked once, steadying himself, then spoke, each word deliberate. Because it is still my choice, he said. Not something decided for me. Not something forced. He paused, just long enough for the silence to settle around it. That is the difference. Zyrietha's gaze tightened, not in resistance, but in focus, like she was trying to grasp something that did not follow her rules. In my empire, she said slowly, individual choice is secondary to collective stability. It is optimized, guided, corrected. Marcus gave a small, tired breath that almost resembled a laugh. Yeah, he said. I figured. He looked at her, not challenging, not accusing, just honest. But if everything you do is decided before you even think about it, is it really your life? The question landed deeper than the others. Not sharp, not loud, just unavoidable. Zyrieth did not answer immediately. Her posture remained perfect, but something beneath it shifted again, more visibly now. Not a fracture. A pause. A real one. My life, she said after a moment, is defined by purpose. It does not require personal interpretation. Marcus nodded once. That sounds efficient, he said quietly. Then he tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. But it also sounds like you never get to ask what you actually want. The words did not echo. They settled, heavier than anything that had come before. For the first time, Queen Zyrietha's gaze broke. Not away from him entirely, but just enough, just a fraction, like the question had landed somewhere she could not immediately access. The wind remained still. The distant hum was gone. There was nothing left but the two of them and the space between their perspectives. Marcus stood there, steady despite the fading strength in his body, his breathing thin but controlled, as if he had already accepted whatever came next. And Zyrieth, The ruler of a system built on certainty, on precision, on outcomes that could be predicted and enforced, stood in that same space, facing something she had never needed to confront before. Not an enemy, not a threat, a question. And for the first time, she did not know if she wanted the answer. The silence did not break, but something inside it did. It was not loud. It was not visible. But Marcus felt it the same way you feel a shift in gravity before you understand what caused it. His breath came thinner now, each inhale shorter than the last, his suit's indicator dimming to 24%, a quiet pulse that no longer demanded attention. He did not look at it. He did not need to. Queen Zarietha's gaze returned to him, but it was no longer the same gaze that had first met him on this field. It did not measure. It did not evaluate. It searched. What I want, she repeated softly, the words unfamiliar in her voice, like something she had heard but never spoken. Marcus did not respond immediately. He watched her, steady, patient, as if he understood that this moment did not belong to him anymore. It belonged to her. The wind remained still, the world holding its breath as something unspoken moved beneath the surface of everything they had said. Zarieth took a slow step forward, closing the last inch of distance between them. Not enough to threaten, just enough to remove the space that had once defined their difference. Up close, her presence was no less powerful, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was present, real in a way that did not rely on control. In my existence, she said, her voice quieter than it had ever been. Desire is not a variable. It is irrelevant to function. Marcus gave a small nod, acknowledging the structure of that truth. Yeah, he said softly. I figured. His voice did not carry judgment, only understanding. Zarietha's eyes held his, and for the first time, there was something within them that did not align with certainty. Something unresolved. If I were to consider it, she continued, slower now, as if each word required effort, it would introduce instability. Conflict. Within the system. Marcus let out a faint breath, almost a quiet laugh, but without humor. Yeah, he said. It probably would. The admission surprised her. That much was clear. And yet you advocate for it, she said. Marcus tilted his head slightly. I do not advocate for chaos, he replied. I just think some things are worth not being perfect. The words settled between them, softer than before, but heavier. Zarietha's posture remained upright, controlled, but something beneath it shifted again, not a break, not a flaw, an opening. Imperfection, she said, almost to herself, the word unfamiliar in a way that carried weight. Marcus nodded once. That is where the interesting parts usually are. The wind brushed lightly across the plain, barely noticeable, like a reminder that the world still existed beyond this moment. Zarietha's gaze drifted for a fraction of a second, not away, but inward, as if she was tracing something that had never been mapped before. If I allow this, she said, her voice low, measured. If I acknowledge the possibility of personal desire, it would alter the structure of everything I have built. Marcus did not look away. Yeah, he said quietly. It might. He paused, just long enough for the silence to hold the weight of it. But it might also make it yours. That landed deeper than anything before it. Not because of how it was said, but because of what it meant. Zarietha's gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, there was no system behind it. No framework. Just presence. Real and unfiltered. The moment stretched, fragile and immense at the same time. Marcus stood there, his breathing shallow now, his strength fading, but his expression steady, grounded in something that did not depend on time. And Zarieth, the queen of an empire that had never questioned its own perfection, stood at the edge of something entirely new. Not a threat, not a challenge, a choice that could not be optimized, a path that could not be predicted. And for the first time in her existence, she felt something she did not have a word for. Something shifted before she spoke, not in the air, not in the ground, but in the quiet space inside her that had never been touched before. Marcus could see it now, not with his eyes, but in the way she no longer stood. As something above him. She stood with him. The difference was subtle, but it changed everything. His breath came shallow, each inhale barely enough, his suit pulsing at 21%, the dim light flickering like it was already preparing to go out. He did not move. He did not step back. There was nowhere left to go that mattered more than this moment. Queen Zarieth lowered her gaze slightly, not in submission, not in weakness, but in something closer to focus, like she was looking at the ground for the first time and realizing it had always been there. "If I choose differently," she said slowly, her voice softer than anything he had heard from her. "If I step outside the structure that defines my empire, then everything that follows becomes uncertain." Marcus nodded faintly. "Yeah," he said, "that is usually how it works." There was no reassurance in his tone, no promise that it would be easier, just truth. Zarietha's fingers moved slightly at her side, a small motion, almost imperceptible, but it broke the stillness of her form in a way nothing else had. "Uncertainty introduces variables that cannot be predicted," she continued. "It disrupts control. It weakens authority." Marcus exhaled slowly, the breath thinner now, but his voice steady. "Or it makes it real," he said. The words did not echo. They settled, quiet and firm. Zarietha's gaze lifted back to his, and this time, there was no distance in it. No separation. Just presence. "You stand here," she said, "on the edge of your own end, and you still choose this." Marcus gave a faint, tired smile, something softer than anything before. "Yeah," he said, "because it is mine." The simplicity of it hit harder than anything else. Not because it was complex, but because it was not. Zarieth held his gaze, and for the first time, there was something in her expression that did not belong to a queen, or a ruler, or a system. It belonged to something individual, something singular. "In my existence," she said slowly, "nothing has ever been mine." The admission changed the air. Not dramatically, not violently, but enough to feel. Marcus did not respond right away. He just looked at her, steady, grounded, like he understood exactly what that meant. "Then maybe this can be," he said quietly. The wind stirred faintly, just enough to move the edge of his sleeve, just enough to remind them both that the world had not stopped. Zarietha's posture shifted again, not breaking, but adjusting, like something inside her had found a new alignment it did not recognize yet. "If I choose this," she said, her voice almost a whisper now, "I cannot return to what I was." Marcus nodded once. "Yeah," he said, "that is kind of the point." The words did not carry force. They did not need to. Zarietha's gaze did not waver. Not this time. The silence stretched, but it no longer felt like hesitation. It felt like something forming, something deciding. The faint glow beneath her skin shifted again, slower now, steadier, like it had found a new rhythm. Marcus stood there, his breathing thin, his strength fading, but his presence unchanged. He did not push. He did not guide. He simply remained. And then, for the first time in her existence, Queen Zarieth made a choice that had not been calculated, not been optimized, not been defined by anything except the moment itself. Her hand lifted slowly, not in command, not in control, but in something far more unfamiliar. Intent. And the moment it moved, the entire system she had built her life upon no longer had authority over what came next. Her hand did not stop halfway. It did not hesitate. It rose fully, slowly, deliberately, and for the first time since she had stepped onto that field, it was not a gesture of command. It was a decision. The air seemed to shift with it, subtle but undeniable, like the world itself recognized something had just changed. Marcus watched her, his vision beginning to soften at the edges, his breath thin, his suit dimming to 18%, but none of that reached him the way this did. Queen Zarieth stood before him, no longer framed by the weight of an empire, no longer defined by systems, or outcomes, or certainty. Just present. Her hand remained suspended between them for a moment, the space no longer a barrier, but an invitation. Marcus looked at it, then back at her. There was no fear in his eyes, no doubt, just quiet understanding. Slowly, with what strength he had left, he lifted his own hand to meet hers. The movement was not perfect, not precise. It did not need to be. When their hands touched, it was not dramatic. There was no surge, no visible reaction. Just contact. Real, simple, undeniable. Zarieth did not pull away. Her fingers adjusted slightly, unfamiliar with the gesture, but not rejecting it. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The wind returned, soft now, moving around them instead of through them, like it was no longer trying to separate what had just been joined. Marcus let out a slow breath, weaker now, but steady. "That is it," he said quietly. Zarietha's gaze remained fixed on him, her expression no longer carrying the structure it once had. It carried something else now. Something new. This, she said softly, is what you define as choice. Marcus gave a faint nod. Yeah, he replied. No system. No calculation. Just you. The words settled gently, but they stayed. Zyrietha's eyes shifted slightly, not away, but deeper, like she was seeing something for the first time that had always been there, just outside her reach. It is inefficient, she said, though there was no conviction behind it anymore. Marcus almost smiled. Yeah, he said. Most meaningful things are. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was calm. The kind of quiet that did not need to be filled. Marcus's hand remained in hers, his grip weaker now, his breathing slower, each inhale softer than the last. Zyrieth felt it. Not as data, not as measurement, as presence, as something that was ending. Her fingers tightened slightly, instinctive, not calculated. Your time is diminishing, she said, her voice quieter than it had ever been. Marcus nodded faintly. Yeah, he said. That was always part of the deal. He looked at her one last time, his vision narrowing, but his expression unchanged. But this, he added softly, this was worth it. The words did not fade. They settled into her, deeper than anything before. Zyrieth held his gaze, and for the first time, there was no system to interpret what she was feeling. No structure to contain it. Only the moment. Marcus's hand loosened slightly in hers. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just gradually, like something coming to rest. His breathing slowed, then softened, then stilled. The wind moved gently across the plain, carrying nothing away. Zyrieth did not move. She remained there, standing in the quiet, his hand still in hers, even after it no longer returned the pressure. The world did not change. The structures in. The distance still stood. The sky still shimmered in violet and gold. But something fundamental had shifted. Slowly, carefully, she lowered their hands, not releasing him, just setting the moment down. Her gaze remained on him, but it was no longer the gaze of a ruler. It was something else, something she did not have a word for yet. The silence stretched, not empty, but full of everything that had just happened. And for the first time in her existence, Queen Zyrieth did not issue a command, did not calculate an outcome, did not define a system. She simply stood there and chose to feel it. Because for the first time, something in her world was not optimized, not controlled, not eternal. And that was exactly why it mattered.